it's about time that I got this bad boy finished. Don't you think? Once I'd finished creating the basic outer shell, it looked awesome, but there were still some final tweaks to make. If you look closely, there are edges that don't line up, there's seams that don't match, and it looks a little bit bodged together. The urge to start hacking away at the uneven seams at this stage is very strong, which I'm a little bit concerned about. However, I do have a plan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to file it all down. I'm going to fill any gaps and basically make it look all nice and neat before I do any painting. I am going to adopt a few different methods for this, including using some filler, some sanding. I'm also going to carve some away using a rotary tool and just basically play around until I get everything looking very, very neat, very tidy and ready for painting. I thought that before I started to take sharp knives, sandpaper and power tools to my carefully constructed foam pieces, I should probably have a bit of a practice, get used to the techniques and work out how it's going to work on the final pieces. During the construction, I mocked up some smaller test pieces as well, using exactly the same techniques. My plan is to use these test pieces to practice filling in any gaps, sanding it down and shaping it so that it looks as I want it. Once I've built up my confidence enough using these test pieces, I will then move on to my model and finish tidying up all of the foam pieces on the actual model itself. Another benefit of having smaller test pieces is that when it comes to the painting, I can try some techniques out first before simply diving in and applying paint straight to the model. It pretty quickly became apparent that the sandpaper and the file were both pretty useless when it came to removing excess material from the foam. The sandpaper was very poor at providing a nice clean edge on the foam, although good for preparing a surface, left the edges and the corners slightly furry, which is not a good look for a model. The file again left edges with torn corners and torn edges, which again is not what I was looking for. In stark contrast, however, the rotary tool was incredibly effective at removing large amounts of excess material from the foam. The main issue I had with the rotary tool is I found it was actually quite difficult to maintain any accuracy when trying to remove the material. In one area, I actually managed to cut through to the PE foam which was underneath, something that I wasn't planning on doing. I also started to try the sealant to find out how effective that was. With a little bit of water, it went on incredibly well and provided very smooth edges. Now obviously I have to wait for this to dry in order to get a final result, but I'm feeling very confident about this so far. With regards to how I am going to be proceeding with my Guyver unit and the foam pieces for this, I do feel that a combination of the rotary tool and the decorator's cork is going to be the most effective way I can get a nice finish and a smooth surface. Better get on with it. Despite having practiced a few times on the test pieces, I was still initially quite reluctant to start carving away at the outer casing pieces. I didn't want to cause any damage after the amount of time that I'd spent building them. However, I did soon get into the flow of it, and I did realise quite quickly that using several passes of very light strokes to remove material was a lot more effective than heavier, more aggressive passes. The material comes off really nicely, and it allows me to produce very nice smooth rounded edges. Sanding using a rotary tool is incredibly messy. There is EVA dust or foam dust literally everywhere, all over the unit, all over the rotary tool, and it's all over me as well, which is one of the reasons I recommended wearing a mask. If you breathe this stuff in, it can be incredibly dangerous. Now, full disclosure, I was having a big issue with this because of my glasses. It was steaming up, so rather than using this one, I actually found a mask that I used back in 2020. I can't remember why I needed a mask in 2020, but I did, and obviously I was wearing this instead, which just reduced the steaming up on my glasses. So now all I need to do is tidy up, get rid of all of the dust particles off my rotary tool, my worktop, and all of these pieces here as well. Probably take a shower, and then I need to get on with filling everything so that I can make all of the edges and gaps nice and smooth for painting. Once I'd actually finished sanding, I then took the pieces indoors to use the filler. Taking the pieces inside actually gave my daughter and I a little bit of bonding time when we both worked together doing the filling of the gaps.
Better not harden, because if this hardens, it's all on the hand.
I must admit, now that they have been sanded down and smoothed down, they look a lot better than they did, and I can't wait to get them painted. When I was putting the control model together, I decided I wanted light to emit from the ring at the bottom of the dome. However, one of the things I hadn't considered when I was building this model is light leakage. If you're not sure what that term means, it's basically when a model emits light from places that it shouldn't. I wanted to make sure that no light was going to be coming out of the unit anywhere other than this ring here on the control model. So as a test, I used some LED strip lights, put them in the model, and tried switching them on. Unfortunately, the light emits really pretty badly. As you can see, most of the light is leaking from the front panel. The reason for this is because I used polystyrene as the modelling material, a material which doesn't block light, it simply diffuses it. So I'm going to have to address that before I complete the model. As well as light leaking out of the front, I noticed that there were some of the seams on the sides of the model, and I knew that I had to take care of those as well. This light leakage is an issue that could potentially really spoil all the hard work that's gone into the model, and I wanted to do something about it. Now luckily, I have already looked into light leakage and preventing it on a previous video that I made for my model railway channel. I made up some test pieces and filled them full of different materials to compare what material was going to be best for preventing light leakage. What I was planning on doing is, before I install all of the electronics, I will coat the inside, or as best as I can, anywhere where there is light leaking from the inside of the model. Hopefully this will then prevent the light from coming out of the model anywhere other than the control module. With the inside of the Guyver unit now sorted, I wanted to focus on the outer casing details. The design includes grooves that runs down the middle of the larger casing pieces and a small indent as well. I wanted to replicate these grooves and indents in the foam before painting, so I decided to once again try some techniques on my small test pieces. Using my rotary tool, I first started to carve out a groove in one of the pieces. I had seen several YouTube videos on how to create details in EVA foam, and a lot of them recommended applying heat to help any grooves expand and open up, so I decided to try using a naked flame. The results weren't wonderful, as some of the foam actually melted slightly. I then decided to try using a scalpel to carve a groove into the foam. I felt this looked a lot neater, but still wasn't exactly as I wanted. I decided that the scalpel would be a good place to start, and then I could use the engraving attachments on my rotary tool to provide the depth and gap that I was looking for. So I set to work carving grooves in my foam pieces. I took my time and used several different attachments until I had managed to remove the indents and create the grooves as I wanted. I then applied more heat, this time being a lot more careful to try and avoid burning the foam. Now all I needed to do was paint the model. When I came to painting the Guyver unit itself, the first thing I needed to do was prime it. So I used a grey primer and I sprayed the whole unit. I also sprayed the removable section of the unit as well, using the same grey primer. After the primer, I then sprayed the model in a matte black spray paint. It was quite exciting to see how dramatically the model changed, simply with the application of the black. The paint really tied everything together nicely, and made the model start to look as I had initially envisioned. Now I know what you're thinking, why did I use black spray paint? Well, I chose the black as it provided an excellent contrast to the purple shades I planned on using to create the biological element of the unit, similar to the test pieces I had created previously. I gathered the internal part of the model, along with acrylic paints in rose and amethyst, as well as some Vallejo model colour paints in purple and royal purple. I felt that a combination of dry brushing and airbrushing would help me to achieve the final look that I want. I initially decided to apply the amethyst as a general base colour to the biological element using the airbrush. As it was quite a thick acrylic paint, I started mixing a few drops with some thinner to thin it down and make it more suitable for my airbrush. Once thinned to a milk-like consistency, I then transferred the paint to my airbrush and started to paint the model. The paint was incredibly subtle on the black undercoat. It hinted at a purple sheen, which actually shows up here on the camera better than it did in person. Even after a few coats, the difference was pretty ineffective, so I decided to change tactics and try a dry brush technique instead. There was a lot of surface area to cover, so I used a 1-inch decorator's brush and started to apply the amethyst onto the black. The effect was instantly much more noticeable, and the colour really started to pop against the black. I applied a few layers on the model, however I wasn't being particularly neat as I wanted to build up the layers of colour in stages. I then applied a dry brush with the rose paint. The contrast of this shade worked incredibly well against the previous layer, and the details really began to show. For the first time, I felt as if the washing line actually started to look like the biological organism inside of the Guyver unit. I was very pleased so far. However, I continued to apply a dry brush over some of the individual bulges and veins using a mixture of the rose and amethyst. As a final touch, I then went back to my airbrush and, using the model colour paint in the purple, started to add additional highlights to individual bulges and veins as well, to give the model more variety. The mixtures of purple shades along with the pinks worked incredibly well. I really feel that this paint job has helped me replicate the internal part of the Guyver unit in a pretty accurate way compared to the original source material. I feel that I have achieved what I set out to do. While the centre part of the model was drying, I then turned my attention to the outer casing made from the foam pieces. Before painting the foam pieces, I wanted to apply a mixture of 50% PVA and 50% water to seal all of the foam. I simply mixed it up in a large tub and then applied it fairly generously using a paintbrush. I then left it to dry, and then I could paint over it with the spray paint. When it comes to painting the outer casing, I have a couple of colour choices in mind. One of them is a midnight blue, which is a spray paint, and I also plan on using a metallic blue, which is a model paint. I am planning on using the Tamiya paint on top of any other paint that I use. I have done a quick test on top of a midnight blue, and as you can see, the metallic properties make this a very nice finish, which I think would work really well as the outer casing of the Guyver unit. The first step was to paint the base coat onto the foam. Using the midnight blue spray paint, I coated one of the larger foam casing pieces. The paint coverage was impressive and made easy work turning the blue foam blue. As I continued to paint the second piece, however, I noticed a difference in the textures between where the foam was bare and where the filler had been applied. It was then that I decided I should possibly use the grey primer on the foam pieces as well to try and eliminate any difference in texture between the foam and the filler. The grey primer has certainly helped a little bit, but it's far from ideal. There is still a clear difference in the textures between where the filler has been applied and where the foam is just bare. I was kind of hoping that the PVA and water mixture would kind of cover up and seal it and make it all fairly uniform, but unfortunately I think I was putting too much hope into that method. I came to the conclusion that if I wanted a smooth, uniform finish, the best way would be to apply filler over the entire surface of the phone. To make it easier, I watered down some of the cork I had previously used and started to smooth it over the phone pieces. Once dried, the texture was much more consistent. I then gave the pieces a coat of primer before repainting them again with the midnight blue spray paint. Overall, I feel that the coat of filler over the entire phone has certainly improved the texture. If nothing else, it has certainly given a consistent finish to which I can apply the final coat of metallic blue paint to. Once the midnight blue spray paint had dried, it was then time to apply the Tamiya metallic paint over the top. I set up a temporary spray booth in my kitchen, mixed up some metallic blue paint and thinner, and started to apply it with my airbrush. Even though the paintbrush was applying a fairly good coverage, it didn't really give me the effect I was looking for. I was hoping for something a bit more reflective. However, the paint that was being applied looked a bit dull. I decided to switch tactics once again, and instead of using the airbrush, I turned to a brush to apply the paint instead. The metallic effect appeared much better using this technique instead. I pretty quickly discovered that by using a stippling effect with the metallic paint, I could achieve a worn and weathered look with several shades and variations appearing with very little effort. I must admit I loved this look. I always imagined that a Guyver unit, forged at the beginning of time and having travelled across the vastness of the entire universe, would probably end up a little bit beat up and worn by the time it arrived on Earth. So this effect was absolutely spot on to what I was looking for. In fact, it looked even better than I had originally hoped. Ever since I first decided that I wanted to build a Guyver unit, I knew that I wanted to include lighting and sound effects as well. Early research into the electronics for this project led me down the road to the Arduino Nano microprocessor, which could control everything. As I mentioned previously, I found a nice LED from a LED cob light, and I included a DF player to incorporate some sound effects as well. I managed to get a circuit put together that worked pretty much as I wanted. However, that was several months ago. Since then, I have dismantled the circuit, played around with loads of different circuits, played around with loads of different programming, and I'll be honest, I can't remember what I did back in the early days of the project. Yeah, it wasn't until I saw this video here that I started to wonder if I could actually bypass any of the programming and build a much simpler circuit without the Arduino instead. Once I'd finished playing around with the circuit on the breadboard, I soon discovered that if I connect the LED light directly to the speaker out of the DF player, then it would actually light up at the same time as playing the audio. Which was exactly what I wanted. Now, you're probably watching this video screaming at the screen saying, you cannot do this, you cannot connect an LED to the output of a MP3 player module, it won't work, it's going to blow up and that sort of thing. And you might be right. However, it seemed to work. The reason I wanted to use the Arduino Nano was because in my initial idea I wanted a button press that would activate the light and sound. I also wanted to use a button to toggle and switch between different sound effects. So one, for example, when the unit is firing up, one when it's sat in its dormant state and it's just active pulsing, and one when it wants to shut down. When it came to the sound effects, I did find quite a few online that I felt were very Guyver Unit-esque. Using Audacity, a free audio editing software that you can get online, I combined all of the sound effects I'd got to make a audio sequence that included the firing up of the Guyver Unit, the pulse when it's online, and when it powers down again. I put that onto an SD card, installed it onto the MP3 player module, and played it back with the LED attached to it as well. And everything started to come together. It was at that point I got very, very excited because the whole project was finally coming together, and I just could not wait to get the electronics installed into the inside of the unit and get this project finished. I started to solder all of the components in place so that I can install them into the unit. My soldering skills, not the best, I'll be honest, but after a quick test, everything was working. When it came to powering the components, I also had that already organised, because on the back is actually 3 AAA batteries with an output of about 4.5 volts, which was actually powerful enough to power everything I needed. The electronics were actually being powered by the 3 AAA batteries, and everything was completely self-contained within the unit. All I needed to do was install it and I could finish the project. It was at that point something went badly wrong. Somehow I managed to short circuit the DF player MP3 module, and nothing would play from that point onwards. I also realised that the chip on the back was actually getting very, very hot. Obviously I wanted to complete this project, so I did order a new replacement MP3 module. However, because it was just prior to Christmas, obviously with New Year, and with shipping taking a lot longer than normal, it was estimated that it's not going to be delivered until about mid-January now. Now obviously I did want to give you a final closure of this project, and I'll be honest, I'm absolutely gutted that it's going to take me about another 2 to 3 weeks before I even get the components to install into the unit. There is a few other things I want to finish off with it. I want to cover it in a protective varnish just to make sure that all of the paint is going to stay on the unit and not rub off. I do want to tidy up some of the metallic finish on the control medal and also on the back, and obviously I want to get the components installed and set up properly. At the moment I have just pinned everything in place just temporarily, just so I can get a dry fit, see what the final unit looks like. but obviously when I come to finish it will all be glued and fixed in place properly. At the moment, 95% of the way there to having a completed Guyver unit. Please tell me in the comments below, what do you think of it? Is it cool or what? I think it is. I'm really pleased with it. I'm really pleased with the outcome. It's taken me a lot longer than I wanted to spend on this. It's taken me a good 6 to 8 months, when I must admit I had it envisioned to take me about a month. So a lot of it was me playing around with different techniques. If I were to build it again, I could probably build it a lot quicker, and obviously I wouldn't spend as much time focusing on different tests and different experimentations. I know that the techniques that I would use to create it, but let me know, do you think that this represents an anime version Guyver unit? Let me know in the comments down below, and as I said, once I've finally got all of the electronics installed and everything completely finished, then I will do a total final reveal. So don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that as well. And until then, enjoy the Guyver. Guyver!